It started like any other Wednesday. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. I wrapped up a successful cybersecurity audit at a small auto parts company in Greenwood. The kind of quiet job that makes you feel like you actually did something worthwhile. No emergencies, no panic phone calls. Just clean logs, a few outdated firewalls, and some grateful managers shaking my hand on the way out. I remember glancing at the clock, 4:12 p.m., and thinking how rare it was to finish early. I texted Melissa, just a casual, heading home early. Want to grab dinner later? No reply, but I didn't think anything of it. She was probably busy or napping. She worked nights sometimes, and her daughter Taylor had the tendency to hog her attention whenever she was around. Still, I had this calm in my chest driving home. I even rolled the windows down, letting that crisp Indiana air fill the truck. That kind of peace that makes you forget you're a grown man with bills and back pain. But the second I pulled into the driveway, the calm cracked. The blinds were drawn tight. Melissa hated closed blinds during the day. It made the house feel claustrophobic, she always said. I stepped inside, and the living room was quiet. Too quiet. No TV, no music, no clinking of dishes or the low hum of the dryer. Just silence. Melissa was sitting on the edge of the couch, upright, tense, hands gripping her knees. Taylor stood a few feet behind her, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Something was wrong. That much was obvious before anyone said a word. I barely got out a, "Hey, what's going on?" before Melissa stood up like she'd been holding her breath. "You need to leave," she said. Just like that. No greeting. No build-up. Just a command thrown into the room like a grenade. I blinked, genuinely thinking I must have misheard her. "What?" And then Taylor's voice, steady, almost rehearsed. "You've made me uncomfortable, Jason. The things you say, the way you look at me, it's not okay." It was like the floor dropped out from under me. I stared at her, my mind spinning so fast I couldn't even latch onto a single thought. I felt like I'd walked into someone else's nightmare. Melissa's eyes didn't soften, not even for a second. "You need to get out. Right now." "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What things? Taylor, what did I say?" She didn't answer. Just shook her head and looked away, arms tightening around herself like I was some monster standing in their living room. I turned to Melissa, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm not doing this with you, Jason. Just go. If you care about keeping this peaceful, go." I opened my mouth again, ready to fight it, to demand they actually explain what the hell they were talking about. But Melissa cut me off with a sharp, cold line that still rings in my head. "Don't contact Taylor again, or I swear I will file a restraining order." That's when I knew there was no reasoning my way through this. I didn't yell. I didn't slam anything. I just stood there, every nerve in my body screaming that this couldn't be real. But it was. I grabbed my wallet, keys, and phone. That was it. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't take clothes or my work laptop. My house key was still in my hand. And for a second, I thought about leaving it on the table, just out of sheer habit. But something in me clenched, and I slipped it into my pocket instead. I walked out of my own house like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. Once I was in the car, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't know where else to go, so I called Evan, my best friend since college. He answered on the first ring. "Hey, what's up?" I didn't even know how to start. My voice cracked on the first word. "Can I crash at your place tonight?" I asked. Something happened. He didn't ask questions. Not then just told me to come over the whole drive to his place. I kept trying to replay everything in my head. What did I say? What had I done that could be twisted into something like that? Taylor was barely around lately, off at her community college, or hanging out with friends. When she was home, I kept my distance. Not because I didn't like her, but because I never wanted to be that cliché stepfather with boundaries issues. I gave her space. Always. Melissa, and I had some rough patches over the years, sure, but nothing that ever felt like this. This wasn't a fight. This was an execution. I slept on Evan's couch that night. Didn't say much. Didn't eat. Just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how my whole life had changed in a matter of 20 minutes. I didn't sleep that night. I don't even think I blinked for more than a few seconds at a time. I lay on Evan's couch, staring at the exposed brick ceiling of his loft like it held the answer to a question I didn't know how to ask. My mind just kept running in circles, dragging me back to the moment Melissa told me to get out. To Taylor's face as she accused me of something so vague but so destructive. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it. Her arms crossed, her words clipped, rehearsed. That hollow look in Melissa's eyes, like whatever we'd shared, whatever trust we'd built, had been wiped away in a single sentence. It made no sense. None of it made sense. And the more I thought about it, the more I felt this nauseating mix of shame and rage settling in my stomach. Evan stayed up with me for a while. He didn't push, just sat on the edge of the couch with a beer in one hand, quietly offering the kind of support only a friend of 20 years can. When I finally told him everything, his reaction was exactly what I needed. "That's bullshit," he said, voice sharp. "Jason, I've known you since we were idiots in dorm rooms. I've seen you pissed off, depressed, stressed out, all of it. But I've never once seen you act inappropriate with anyone. Ever." He offered to write a statement right then and there, something official, just in case things got legal. "Character matters," he said, "and I'll stand by yours every time." It meant a lot, but it didn't fix the gnawing pit in my chest. I wasn't just worried about my marriage anymore. I was thinking about my job, my name, the way this kind of accusation sticks like tar no matter how false it is. I work in cybersecurity. Trust is everything. One whisper of impropriety, even something vague and unproven, could be enough to kill a contract and a career. The stakes weren't just emotional now. They were existential. By morning, I snapped into autopilot. Maybe it was survival mode. Maybe just the habits of someone who's used to dealing in evidence and facts. I pulled out my laptop, logged into every cloud account, every messaging app, every email archive I had access to. I started gathering everything. I wasn't even sure yet who I was compiling it for, my lawyer, Melissa, myself, but I needed something tangible, something real to hold on to in the middle of this madness. I went through old messages from Taylor, trying to figure out when this alleged discomfort started. At first, I found nothing out of the ordinary. A couple of short birthday texts, shared memes, the occasional, "Hey, can you pick up almond milk on your way home" kind of thing. Then I hit a thread from just 2 weeks ago. Taylor had messaged me late at night, asking for help with one of her digital forensics assignments. I remembered it because she was frustrated about not understanding checksum algorithms, and I ended up walking her through the whole thing. The tone of her messages stopped me cold. "Thanks so much, Jason. Seriously, you explained this better than my professor. You're a lifesaver. I would have failed this without you. You always take the time to help even when I know you're busy. I really appreciate it. No tension, no discomfort, nothing that even remotely suggested what she accused me of. Just gratitude, familiarity, even a kind of warmth I hadn't noticed before because at the time it didn't seem strange. But now those messages glowed like warning signs I'd ignored. If someone truly made you feel unsafe, you don't ask them for academic help at midnight. You don't compliment them on how patient and helpful they are. You don't thank them for always being there. I scroll further. More of the same. Her asking for my notes from a webinar I'd attended, me sending them with a brief explanation, her replying with, "You're literally more helpful than half my department." And just a week before everything fell apart, she'd send me a photo of her essay with a caption, "Passed. You were right about that source. BTW. Thank you." I sat back, hands trembling, staring at my screen. I wasn't crazy. This wasn't just some paranoid fantasy. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it in every line of those texts. I started flagging the messages, taking screenshots, backing them up on separate drives. I opened my email history with Melissa too, just in case there were any gaps I could fill. Nothing suspicious there, but I kept everything anyway. I started saving photos. Pictures of us as a family, vacations, holidays, anything that showed normalcy, trust, affection. Not because I thought they would clear my name in court if it ever got there, but because I needed to remind myself this wasn't how it had always been. Somewhere in that digital pile of evidence, I found a photo from last Thanksgiving. Taylor sitting at the table, laughing at something I'd said. Melissa was looking at her, smiling. It didn't make sense. None of this matched the narrative I'd been thrown out over. But it was clear now. If I didn't take this seriously, if I didn't start protecting myself with the same precision I use to secure client networks, I'd lose more than just a house. I'd lose my identity. I made a decision then. No more passivity. No more sitting around hoping Melissa would come to her senses or that Taylor would suddenly retract her words. I had to move forward like I would in a breach case. Gather intel, secure assets, prepare defenses. I didn't know yet what I was fighting exactly, but I knew it was big enough to destroy me if I stayed still. Hiring a lawyer wasn't something I ever thought I'd have to do in the context of my marriage. I always imagined divorce as something other people went through, people who drifted apart, who fought constantly, who cheated or gave up. But not us. Melissa and I weren't perfect, but we had routines, shared values, a rhythm. At least I thought we did. Until the day she chose to believe a vague accusation over a decade of partnership. Until she told me to leave without asking a single question. That, as Michael Dempsey put it, told me everything I needed to know. Dempsey came recommended by a colleague who had gone through his own brutal split last year. The guy called him the clean scalpel kind of lawyer, not the kind who kicks down doors or runs smear campaigns, but someone surgical, thorough, and quietly devastating in court. That's exactly what I needed. Someone who could cut to the noise and focus on what mattered. Protection, stability, clarity. His office was a quiet suite in a gray building in North Indy. Nothing flashy, just calm professionalism. When I walked in with a folder full of screenshots, PDFs, and backup drives, I half expected a raised eyebrow. But Dempsey took everything in without a blink. He reviewed the messages from Taylor, the timestamps, the emails, even some casual family photos, all while keeping his expression unreadable. When he was done, he leaned back in his chair, hands folded neatly in his lap. "She didn't ask you a single question before throwing you out?" he asked. "None," I said. "She didn't even let me speak." He nodded slowly. That alone tells me where her loyalty stands. It's not neutral, and it's not curious. It's hostile. He tapped the side of the folder. "These texts from her daughter, they contradict the implication that you were making her feel unsafe. They show routine communication, gratitude, reliance. If this was about discomfort, there were plenty of off-ramps before it escalated to a live accusation." He paused, then said it clean and direct. "My advice? Divorce. Immediately. You don't want to be tethered to this woman when the fallout comes." The words hit hard, but they didn't surprise me. I'd known, deep down, since the moment Melissa looked me in the eye and told me to leave. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a choice. I nodded and signed the retainer that afternoon. That was the last time I contacted Melissa directly. Everything after that went through Dempsey. I shut off my old joint email with her and created a new one for legal and personal use. I blocked her number, blocked Taylor's too. I wasn't going to play games. I wasn't going to let their accusations twist any deeper into my life. The silence didn't last long. Within days, Melissa was lighting up my inbox with long, dramatic messages sent through friends, old colleagues, and even Evan. One email started with, "I can't believe you're abandoning us over a misunderstanding," and ended with, "Taylor's traumatized, and your cold silence is making it worse." Another said, "If you just apologize, this could have been handled privately." That one made my blood boil. Apologize? For what? For being accused without cause? For being kicked out of my own home like a criminal? I read every message, but I didn't reply to a single one. Instead, I focused on the tangible, the things I could fix. I started looking for places to live, somewhere quiet, stable, not too far from the city. I needed space to work and breathe. I found a small house in Carmel, nothing fancy, but it had clean walls, working appliances, and a spare bedroom that I immediately turned into a home office. The landlord didn't ask many questions, and I didn't offer any answers. I signed the lease and moved in with nothing but a few suitcases and the gear Evan helped me grab from storage. There was something liberating about furnishing a place from scratch. No arguments about color schemes or what art to hang on the walls. Just decisions. Mine. I picked out a used desk, a decent chair, and spent an afternoon wiring my equipment into a proper setup again. The house was quiet. Sometimes too quiet. But it was mine. No one else had keys. No one else was deciding what I could or couldn't do. In the evenings, I went for long walks around the neighborhood, earbuds in, listening to nothing in particular, just letting the motion scrub the edges off the chaos in my head. I wasn't angry all the time, but there was a deep, steady burn that hadn't gone out since that first night. It wasn't just about the accusation anymore. It was about the betrayal, about how fast someone you loved could turn on you. Melissa didn't even blink before assuming the worst of me. She didn't ask, didn't hesitate, didn't care. And that was what Dempsey was right about. You don't come back from that. Not really. So I stayed silent. I kept my head down, my records clean, and my lawyer looped in. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want drama. I just wanted distance and peace. And for the first time in weeks, I was starting to believe I might actually find both. On the 15th day after I walked out of my own home with nothing but my wallet and keys, Melissa called. I saw the name flash across my screen as I stood in the kitchen of my new rental, staring into a half-empty coffee mug. For a long moment, I didn't move. I hadn't heard her voice since the day she ordered me out like some uninvited guest in my own life, and now suddenly, without warning, she was reaching out. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her tone was soft, measured, like someone trying to handle glass without breaking it. "Jason," she began, drawing out the word like it hurt her to say it. "I've been thinking, maybe we can talk. Maybe we can work this out. If you're ready to acknowledge what happened." That line, that phrasing, it was like a hand clenching around my chest. Acknowledge what happened. As if there was something real to confess to. As if my innocence was just a temporary protest that I needed to surrender for the sake of peace. She spoke like we were dealing with a marital spat. Like I had left in anger and now just needed time to cool off before crawling back. Then she added, "We could try therapy. As a family, Taylor's been struggling. We just want to move forward." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even respond with anger. I said calmly, "Let's meet tomorrow. Talk in person." She agreed without hesitation. Told me to come by at 10 in the morning. I ended the call and stood in my silent kitchen, the weight of what I had just agreed to settling over me like a stone blanket. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow, but I also felt sure. The next morning, I arrived at the house exactly on time. Only I wasn't alone. Michael Dempsey came with me, dressed in a quiet gray suit, briefcase in hand, every step deliberate and clean. We parked at the curb and walked up the front steps without speaking. The door opened almost immediately, as if Melissa had been waiting just on the other side. Her smile faded the second she saw Dempsey. "Jason, what is this?" she asked, her voice clipped, her eyes already narrowing. "This," I said, handed her the thick envelope from Dempsey's briefcase, "is what happens when trust is destroyed." She took it, hands trembling slightly, eyes flicking over the document title. "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." For a few seconds, she just stared at it, as if she couldn't read the words, as if the reality was too foreign to absorb. "You're divorcing me?" she asked, her voice small now. "You made your choice the day you believed in accusation without a question." I replied, keeping my voice level. "You didn't ask. You didn't hesitate. You just assumed I was capable of something vile. That doesn't get undone with therapy or a phone call." Taylor appeared behind her in the hallway. Her eyes were wide, already glossy with unshed tears. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "No," I said, not unkindly but firmly. "This doesn't happen here. Not like this. If there's something to say, you can say it through legal counsel. This is no longer a personal matter. It became a legal one the moment you both decided to treat me like a criminal in my own home." Melissa looked like she'd been slapped. "I thought we could—" "Jason, I thought maybe you'd come to your senses." "I did," I said quietly. "That's why I'm here with a lawyer, not an apology." Taylor stepped forward, and for a second her composure cracked. Her lips trembled, and she said, "I didn't mean—" But I cut her off with a glance. "Taylor," I said, my voice low but firm, "I'm not having this conversation here. You had your chance to speak the truth before this spiraled. Now it's out of my hands." Melissa tried to interject again, saying something about confusion, about emotions, about needing more time to explain. But I didn't let it land. I turned to Dempsey, who handed her a business card and told her to have her attorney contact his office within a week. Then I stepped back outside, not waiting for another word. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask why. Because I already knew. That morning, as I walked back to the car with Dempsey by my side, I felt the weight of 15 years fall away in silence. No drama, no final plea. Just papers, signatures, and a clean break from people who chose suspicion over love. 2 weeks after I served the papers, I got a formal notice from Michael that Melissa and her attorney had requested a mediation meeting. No explanation, just a proposed date, time, and location, neutral ground, a downtown office suite in Indianapolis. I said yes without hesitation, not because I expected anything good to come from it, but because closure doesn't always show up in the form you want. Sometimes it wears a suit and comes with paperwork and silence, and sometimes it comes in the form of someone crawling back to the very mess they created, hoping to rewrite the ending. I wasn't interested in rewriting anything. I just wanted the book closed. When I walked into the conference room that morning, I spotted Melissa immediately. She didn't look like herself. Not the composed, image-conscious woman I'd known for nearly a decade. She looked like a shadow, hair unbrushed, sweater rumpled, eyes ringed in exhaustion. She was sitting hunched at the table, clutching a tissue that was already frayed at the corners. Her attorney sat beside her, stiff and unreadable. Michael and I sat opposite, calm, steady, prepared. There was a moment of stillness, the kind that drips with tension. Then Melissa looked up at me, and for the first time since everything started, I saw regret. Not the kind you fake, not the kind you perform for leverage, but the kind that digs itself into your bones when the damage is irreversible. She lied. Melissa said, voice raw. Taylor admitted she lied. I said nothing. I didn't flinch. I didn't lean forward. I just waited. Melissa swallowed, her hands shaking as she fidgeted with the edge of the tissue. She told me last week. She broke down. She said she made the whole thing up because she wanted me and Todd to get back together. Apparently, he reached out to her a few months ago on social media, said he regretted everything, that he missed having a family. She thought if she could drive a wedge between us, maybe. She trailed off, then added quietly, maybe we'd all go back the way things were before you. Still, I said nothing. The room was too quiet. She saw me talking about how distant things have felt lately, Melissa continued. And I think she latched on to that. She thought she was helping. And I believed her. Her eyes met mine, desperate and hollow. Jason, I didn't know. I didn't think She said you made her uncomfortable, and I reacted like a mother would. I didn't ask. I didn't wait. I thought I was protecting her. Michael shifted slightly beside me, but I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Melissa. I made a terrible mistake, she said, voice cracking. I should have listened to you. I should have trusted you. I see that now. I see what I did. I destroyed everything over a lie. The word hung there. Lie. I let it sink in, let her sit in it. Then I finally spoke. You didn't just destroy a marriage, Melissa. You tried to destroy me. You threw me out without a conversation. You stood by while your daughter, your adult daughter, spun a fantasy so toxic that you would have seen it for what it was if you'd stopped the thing for even 5 seconds. And instead of asking questions, you threatened me with a restraining order and told me to go. She shook her head, tears slipping down her face now. I was scared. I didn't want to risk. No, I cut in calmly. You didn't want to be wrong. That's what this was. You didn't want to risk trusting me and being embarrassed if it turned out she was telling the truth. You chose the easier path. The one that made you look like the concerned mother, the responsible protector. The one where you didn't have to defend your husband because you already decided he was expendable. She flinched like I'd struck her, but I didn't raise my voice, I didn't gloat, I just let the words land. I have no doubt Taylor's going through something, I said. She's young, angry, clearly manipulative, and maybe she thought this was all some twisted way to fix her broken family dynamic. But she's not the one I was married to. She didn't vow to have my back. You did. And the second it mattered, you folded. You gave her power, and she used it to destroy what little trust we had left. Melissa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice almost a whisper. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know the truth. I already knew the truth, I said. The truth is that when I needed you to believe in me, you didn't. That doesn't get undone by a confession 2 weeks later. Her attorney cleared his throat, perhaps sensing the meeting had run its course. Michael glanced at me, but I was already standing. I'll sign what I need to sign, I said. But this conversation is over. I'm not interested in repairing what's been shattered beyond recognition. Melissa looked up one last time, pleading, Jason, please. I didn't respond. I didn't owe her a second more. I walked out of that room with my head high, knowing exactly who I was, and exactly who I never want to be again. The final paperwork came through without resistance. Melissa didn't contest a divorce. No requests, no last-minute motions, no attempts to drag it out. Just a quiet agreement through her attorney that everything would proceed as filed. It didn't feel like victory, and it didn't feel like closure. It felt like the last page of a book I didn't want to read in the first place finally being turned. Dempsey arranged for a brief window when I could retrieve my remaining belongings from the house. My tools, some clothing, a box of personal documents, a few sentimental items I hadn't thought about until I saw them listed in the property division. I made it clear I'd only go if Melissa wasn't there, and her attorney confirmed she'd be out of town that day. I didn't trust her to keep her distance, and I didn't trust myself to stay calm as she tried to turn the moment into something emotional. I showed up alone. The house felt hollow, quieter than I remembered, like it had already given up pretending to be a home. The scent was different. No trace of Melissa's perfumes or cooking or candles. Just stale air and a faint chemical edge like someone had recently cleaned and tried too hard. I moved through the rooms like a stranger. My old jackets were still in the front closet. My toolbox was untouched in the garage, and a pair of hiking boots I thought I'd lost were tucked behind the washer. I grabbed what was mine, kept it efficient, avoided looking at the family photos still on the walls. They didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't linger. 43 minutes in total. I left without locking the door behind me. That night, a text came in from an unfamiliar number, but I recognized the tone the second I read the first line. It was Taylor. She didn't waste time with excuses. She started with "I'm sorry," followed by a jumbled confession that sounded more like a journal entry than an apology. She admitted everything. Making it up, manipulating her mother, feeding on my silence. She said she never meant for things to go so far, that she had just wanted her parents back together and didn't know how else to get it. She ended with, "I'm moving to Fort Wayne to live with my dad for a while. I think it's better this way." I read it once. I didn't reply. I didn't save the number. I didn't screen capture the message. I deleted it. She was old enough to lie. So she's old enough to live with the consequences. That's what I told Evan when we had drinks later that week. He nodded without asking for details. That's the kind of friend he is. Back in Carmel, the new house slowly stopped feeling temporary. I bought a proper bed frame. I ordered a dining table, the kind I actually liked, not something Melissa picked because it matched the drapes. I set up the second bedroom as a proper workspace, installed shelves, mounted monitors, built a small server rack in the corner. My old life hadn't just broken, it had burned to the ground. But in the ashes, something quieter and stronger started to take shape. Work exploded. Word spread fast about the consulting firm I was launching, and within 3 weeks, I was juggling more clients than I had at any point in the last year. I stayed busy, not as a distraction, but as a way to reclaim control. When I was auditing networks, tightening digital vulnerabilities, locking down systems, I felt grounded again. I was back in a world that made sense, where cause and effect followed logic, where lies didn't get you sympathy and truth wasn't optional. I no longer checked old email threads. I didn't wonder what Melissa was doing. I didn't care if Taylor stayed in Fort Wayne or ended up back in her dorm. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the silence in my new house, the kind that wasn't cold or empty, but calm. Earned. Final. Healing didn't come in one sweeping gesture or some dramatic realization. It came quietly, without fanfare. It started with small things. Clearing out old emails, rearranging my workspace, taking walks in the morning without a phone in my hand. I stopped checking the time constantly. I stopped bracing myself for messages that never came. The silence that used to feel like a weight pressing against my chest began to feel like space. Breathable, clean, necessary. Work stabilized quickly. The momentum I had built during the divorce didn't slow down. If anything, it grew. Clients kept coming. I joined a couple of local IT and cybersecurity meetups in Carmel and Indianapolis, mostly just to get out of the house. At first, it felt strange, showing up alone, introducing myself without the usual reference to being married or part of a we. But eventually, it felt freeing. I could be exactly who I was, without carrying the shadows of someone else's expectations. I made a few connections that turned into actual friendships, not the superficial kind built on convenience, but the kind where people show up without needing anything from you. I also started hiking again, not just the casual trail loops I used to take when Melissa and I needed something healthy to do together, but real solo hikes, the kind that make your legs ache and your brain shut up for a few hours. There was something grounding about climbing until the city noise faded, about standing on high ground with no one around. Somewhere along the way, I picked up photography too. It wasn't a planned hobby. It just happened. I started snapping shots of tree lines, fog over water, rusting fences, and broken cabins tucked into overgrowth. Details I never noticed when my mind was always somewhere else. One afternoon, I ran into Melissa at the grocery store. I was grabbing a few things: eggs, coffee, some pasta. It was raining outside, one of those slow spring drizzles that makes the parking lot shine like oil. I turned a corner in the produce aisle, and there she was, staring at a stack of apples like she had forgotten what she was looking for. She looked thinner, not sick, but worn out. Her hair was tied up messily, no makeup, clothes thrown on with no thought. When she saw me, her expression flickered, recognition, tension, then hesitation. But I didn't stop. I didn't tense up or feel my stomach drop. I gave her a simple nod, just enough to acknowledge her existence. And then I walked past her like I would anyone else. That was the moment I realized the anger was gone. The weight was gone. I didn't hate her. I didn't want to speak to her. I didn't even care what she was thinking. All I felt was peace, complete, solid, and unshakable. Not because she didn't deserve consequences. Not because what happened didn't matter. But because it no longer controlled any part of me. A few days later, Evan dropped by for a beer, and while we sat on the back porch watching the sun sink behind the trees, he mentioned that Taylor had moved back to Indianapolis. Apparently, her father hadn't been interested in being a full-time parent. The fantasy didn't survive contact with the real man. She came back, Evan said, tail between her legs, drifting somewhere between her mother's place and a friend's couch. I asked him not to elaborate. I didn't want details. I didn't need to know how she felt, what she regretted, or what Melissa was doing now that the illusion had collapsed. It didn't bring me comfort. It didn't feel like karma. It just confirmed what I already knew, that I made the right choice walking away. Melissa was alone now. Taylor had no anchor. The world they had built on manipulation, silence, and assumption had started to cave in. But I wasn't there to see it, and I didn't need to be. I was busy living again. Quietly, steadily, honestly. That was more than enough. 3 months after I handed Melissa those divorce papers, my life looked nothing like it had before. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like a good thing. The dust had settled, not just in the legal sense, but in the internal way that matters more. The days no longer felt like I was walking through the wreckage of something that used to be mine. I wasn't rebuilding a version of my past anymore. I was building something new from the ground up, and everything about it was mine. Work had taken off faster than I expected. The newest contract, a long-term consulting deal with a major hospital system, came through after several rounds of proposals and presentations, and it felt like a quiet reward for every sleepless night I'd spent clawing my way back into stability. The scope was wide: auditing security infrastructure, developing protocols, training staff, and it came with a level of respect and autonomy I hadn't experienced in years. They weren't just hiring me for my skill set. They trusted my judgment. That validation mattered more than I wanted to admit. At a networking event for regional IT professionals, the kind I usually showed up to out of obligation more than interest, I met Amber. She worked for a mid-sized cybersecurity firm and had been on a panel earlier that day discussing insider threats in healthcare systems. Her insights were sharp, her delivery blunt but smart. We ended up at the same table later during the mixer, talking shop between sips of mediocre wine. There wasn't an instant spark, nothing cinematic or dramatic, but there was something steady in the way she listened, the way she asked real questions, the way she wasn't trying to impress anyone. We talked for over an hour before exchanging cards. A few days later, she texted me. "That pasta place you mentioned, should we see if it lives up to your hype?" I told her I'd take that risk. It wasn't a date, not officially. Just two people with overlapping work lives grabbing dinner. No expectations, no pressure. I wasn't looking to fill a void. I wasn't trying to start anything. I was just open to what came next. One evening, I sat out on the deck behind my house, the same small space I'd cleaned and stained myself a month before, with a cheap patio set and a grill I bought secondhand but restored like it was a classic car. The air smelled like spring and charred cedar, and the sun had started its slow descent behind the trees that lined the back fence. My laptop was open beside me, a beer half finished on the table. That's when an email from Michael Dempsey landed in my inbox. Subject: Final decree and case closure. I opened it without hesitation. There were no surprises. Just clean, professional language. The court had finalized everything. Property division approved. No outstanding disputes. No follow-up required. My marriage, on paper and in life, was officially over. I leaned back in my chair, watching the light shift across the sky, and let it settle. All the noise from those first days, the accusations, the confusion, the heartbreak, the anger, felt distant now. Not gone, not forgotten, but quieted. I thought about how easily Melissa had believed the worst of me, how Taylor had weaponized her own story to manipulate the people around her. I remember the isolation of those early nights at Evan's loft, the emails Melissa sent demanding apologies, the cold silence of my empty home. But what I kept coming back to wasn't the damage they'd done. It was how I had responded. I hadn't lashed out. I hadn't begged. I hadn't tried to control what I couldn't. I chose dignity. I gathered facts, protected my name, and when the time came, I walked away. I didn't explain myself to people who didn't want the truth. I didn't try to prove anything to the ones who had already decided who I was. I simply chose not to carry their weight any longer. As the final edge of sun dipped below the tree line, my phone buzzed again. "Amber, Friday work for you? Or are you secretly one of those people who can't handle carbs before the weekend?" I laughed quietly to myself and replied without hesitation. Then I set the phone down, took another sip of beer, and let my head fall back against the chair. The night air moved gently around me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt exactly where I was supposed to be, not looking backward, not chasing anything, just still and finally at peace.